Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday morning here from the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and I'm coming to you guys. Well, this video will be uploaded, obviously, right away on Tuesday morning, but we're fresh off of a 49ers absolute stomping of the Los Angeles Rams on Monday Night Football. That was quite an embarrassing performance. We saw a lot in that game. We saw very little of Odell Beckham Jr. We saw Deebo Samuel playing some running back and looking dang good while doing it, and then flashing that he is essentially an unstoppable wide receiver after the catch. We made some prop bets last night on Thrive Fantasy. For those of you who are new around here, you got to go check out Thrive. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's essentially Underdog Fantasy, which is something I think a lot of you are familiar with. And Thrive, my favorite feature on there is their player prop bet section, which is essentially the pick'em area on Underdog Fantasy. But Thrive actually gives you better multipliers than Underdog does, depending on how many players you're putting into your props. Last night, we came up just short. We had Cooper Kupp. We picked the over on him. He got the job done for us. Always reliable. Our wide receiver won the rest of the season here at SFS. But then Brandon Ayuk, he let us down. I'm not too concerned about what that means for Brandon Ayuk the rest of this fantasy season. I will have put that Thrive prop that I made up on the screen for you guys so you can take a look at that. When you deposit between $10 to $100 using promo code Sizzle, they'll match you 100% of whatever you put in, again, between $10 and $100. So if you put in $100, they'll give you $100 free for using our promo code. Brandon Ayuk didn't have to do much in that game. Now, it wasn't something, there really wasn't much asked of him in that contest because the 49ers figured out a formula to at least keep that Rams offense off the field and kind of force their hand a little bit here. They're a bit dysfunctional and a bit out of whack. I think Robert Woods going down and having to transition Odell Beckham Jr. right into that wide receiver 2 role off of less than a week's turnaround here was actually quite a big deal in this game. And then with the 49ers run game between Elijah Mitchell and I talked about Deebo Samuel, what they were able to do in that contest, that was one heck of a performance from San Fran's offense, and they were able to get things going for a bit there. But came up short in our prop for Monday night. Thursday night, we'll hit you guys back with our prop bets for Thursday Night Football on Thrive Fantasy. Again, deposit between $10 and $100, and you'll get yourself an instant deposit match and a free month of SFS Gold, our exclusive membership service here on the channel. Today, though, that was just a quick recap of last night's contest. We've got ourselves some wide receivers that we're talking about here. Wide receivers, in fact, that are rising up my rest of season rankings board, or just in the near future here. We're basically talking about wide receivers whose arrows are trending upwards, pointed upwards towards the sky, and they're going to be putting up some nice numbers and production for us in the next coming weeks. We'll talk about these players, obviously, as we get through each individual one of them here. So we've done a lot of yapping. Let's hit the intro and get right in to our first wide receiver that's rising up my rankings list here in Week 11. Alrighty, that was a nice long intro to get today's episode kicked off. I kind of liked it though, I'm not going to lie. I like just kind of talking some football and not just getting straight into things. I like to interact with you guys and have football-like conversations with the SFS community here. So if you've got football takes, questions, fantasy-related topics, whatever it is, drop it down in the comment section below. I strive to be the most interactive fantasy football YouTuber out there. So that means I want to talk to each and every single one of you guys, give you my take on things, and all that good stuff. We love everything football here at SFS. Stefon Diggs, though, is my first wide receiver who I've got trending upwards and rising up my rankings list. I've had him slowly trending down over the last, month and a half or so now of the fantasy season, for the simple fact that while he's been a reliable wide receiver 1 asset for us, he hasn't quite flashed the 2020 ceiling that we saw out of him a season ago with Josh Allen under center. And finally, here in Week 10, Stefon Diggs had that massive performance. It was an absolute week changer for a lot of lineups out there. 8 grabs, 162 yards and a touchdown. 1 drive, Josh Allen totally locked in on Stefon Diggs, and they marched the football all the way down the field. And he literally scored touchdowns on back-to-back plays. One of them they called incomplete. Looked like a touchdown to my eye test. They come back to literally to what to me looked like the exact same play the next snap later, and then ended up scoring 6 on that one. Stefon Diggs, we talked about this all offseason long. We knew that this was one of the best quarterback wide receiver duos and stacks in fantasy this year. Maybe the overall statistical production hasn't quite been what we expected it to be this season, But overall, the combination of talent and the chemistry these two have is absolutely phenomenal. Just think back to last season if you played fantasy last year. Week 16, Bills, Patriots, Stefon Diggs, 3 touchdowns, a massive performance in what was in a lot of cases a league winner. I actually had my heart broken in that game. A season back to Eric here from the channel. I had Devonta Adams the night before on Sunday night, score 3 touchdowns, 142 yards receiving. And I'm playing Eric in the championship game of our league. And Eric's got Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen together and put those 2 players, and they ended up upsetting me, winning that championship. That's just, putting on display the type of things Stefon Diggs can do. When you've got a quarterback with a rocket arm like Josh Allen and a wide receiver like Stefon Diggs who can stretch the field, make the spectacular grab, have exceptional awareness of the boundary, the sideline, the red zone, wherever he's on the field, and pristine route running. You've got really all of the elements at play here to give yourself this sky-high ceiling. And this was long overdue. Stefon has had very impressive weeks throughout this season, but moving forward here, I'm hoping we can see more of this. And if he's able to do that with some of the tougher top-end wide receivers, or some of these schedules, I should say, that are of greater difficulty over the back half of this season or the back end stretch of the year here as we move closer and closer to playoff time, I'm hoping that combination, that chemistry, and that connectivity between Stefon Diggs as a wide receiver and Josh Allen as a quarterback will hold true here and ultimately give us the production we're looking for. This is kind of, and I don't want to get too much into other wide receivers that we're not going to talk about in today's episode, but you think of like a Jamar Chase and a Joe Burrow, the connection, the chemistry they have. Those are the type of things that help wide receivers elevate themselves over difficult matchups, which Stefon Diggs has some of down the stretch here. I think that Josh Allen and him pairing those 2 together is what can help overcome that, though. So Stefon Diggs, certainly somebody who's rising up my rankings list, closer and closer to that top-end level of that wide receiver 1 grouping. Darnell Mooney didn't play this week, still a wide receiver. I'm absolutely loving here the rest of the way this season as a potential high upside flex play if you're in a 1 or 2 flex league. I think Darnell Mooney's got a lot of fantasy potential written all over him the rest of the season. Something I want to preface here, something I want to make note of before we get too far in today's episode. Not all these players are going to be your top of the list wide receiver 1s or weekly lineup starts. Those players obviously are increasing or decreasing in stock every week based off of their performances. But I want to toss some names out there as well that I think can have some utility in our lineups for us down the stretch of the season that are either attainable and acquirable via trade, or you can potentially find some way to finagle from other teams. Now, Stefon Diggs is not an example of that type of a player, but Darnell Mooney was important for me to include on this list because he's a player of lower-end fantasy status that I think can be a big and, again, a major ceiling asset for a lot of our teams down the stretch of this season. Justin Fields showed me a lot of impressive things, and that's really where this is formulated upon and where this overall trending upwards assessment builds its basis upon. And that's how poised Justin Fields looked against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a very, very good pass rush last week on Monday Night Football. And I love the fact that they're getting a bye week after that contest. Continue to build upon the things you did well in that game and get even better in the areas where you didn't perform so hot. David Montgomery, another week of rest and another week of him getting healthier. That's going to help set up the balance of this run game and the play-action pass game, which will greatly benefit Darnell Mooney as a deep shot threat down the field. When you've got a quarterback with the arm talent of Justin Fields, the athleticism to break outside the pocket and make improv plays on the move and hit a player like a Darnell Mooney deep downfield for a long strike touchdown, that's the type of thing that's going to give you difference-making upside out of this flex position. And we've talked about in yesterday's episode, and we'll talk about again today in our running backs episode with players who are rising up my rankings list. The Bears have a great rest of season schedule in terms of their playoff matchups, in particular weeks 15 through 17, the opponents they have during that stretch of time. Very, very opportunistic matchups for the Bears to go out and capitalize in those games. So if Justin Fields continues taking steps forward as a passer, continues to look poised in the pocket, this is something I expect to click long-term this season. Justin Fields has talked about Darnell Mooney's the guy that stays after practice late with him and works on running routes and the timing of everything they're doing in this offense. That's what builds chemistry. That's going above and beyond Darnell Mooney trying to establish himself as Justin Fields' top target. And that's really up in the air right now. Allen Robinson is obviously a player who I would say is a more complete wide receiver in the NFL at this point in time. He's a veteran. He's a former Pro Bowler. We've seen him have massive 150-plus target seasons. We've seen Allen Robinson come out here and have wide receiver 1 seasons in fantasy. But Darnell Mooney right now is looking like he's going to take this thing over as the Bears' top receiving threat now. It's a neck-and-neck race here in terms of how that's actually going to play out the rest of the season because, again, I think A-Rob's the better overall player, the more polished veteran presence on that team. But when you have a young quarterback, you tend to see a little bit of shuffling up of the dynamic in some offenses, and this situation is no different. So Darnell Mooney, there's a lot of upside here going forward. Again, it's not necessarily that he's going to be a given 10, 11, 12-point play in the flex weekly because I still think while this thing is growing and developing, maybe he doesn't have the most stable floor. But after the work they did in that Pittsburgh game, Darnell Mooney had an impressive performance in that contest as well. And given the upside and the play style of Mooney, I think that's something great that they can build upon here the rest of this season. Hollywood Brown, a player who I'm also very confident in going forward the rest of the season. I had my concerns about him earlier on in the year because with Rashad Bateman returning off the injured reserve, I thought that spelled bad news for Marquise Brown in his overall fantasy outlook the rest of this year. But Lamar Jackson, while Rashad Bateman is stepping forward and proving to be a very, very crucial part of this passing offense and a very, very proficient player at his position for being so young, I think Rashad Bateman's going to be a star in this league. His route running ability, his awareness, his overall pristine route running, he does so many things at a fantastic level that makes me feel that he's going to take that next jump at some point in time. And I think he is creeping towards lineup startability again as another key flex contributor here down the stretch of this season. But Hollywood Brown has really remained in the driver's seat in terms of leading this team in targets every week, being the player who's stretching the field and making those explosive plays. And really the one thing that's held him back has been drops. This past week, it was Lamar Jackson's poor passing. He was very inaccurate. There was a lot of passes that I felt, Hollywood Brown was getting peppered in targets. He had over 10 for the third straight week here. And whether it was Lamar throwing the ball into the dirt, being so heavily pressured that he had literally less than 2 counts to get rid of the football, or the fact that part of this plays into just the situation of that Thursday night game against the Dolphins. Miami knew that the Ravens were throwing on every snap of this game. Clearly, the difference to me in this contest was the pass rush of the Dolphins, and it was the overall game atmosphere and climate that was having such a large impact on what the Ravens were doing. It was super hot and humid in Miami for that game. The field, the turf conditions were very sloppy. It was a very players were falling down left and right, basically, and it was very tough for them to get their footing. Hollywood was actually to a point where that humidity was causing him cramping. He had to frequently go over to the sideline, get stretched out, and get him looked at, get more fluids in his body. It was a rough situation out there. The Dolphins, obviously practicing in that weather every single day, are more acclimated to that heat. That played a factor in this game as the Ravens were clearly gassed at the end of it, and since they were playing catch-up, they were at a loss here. But Hollywood Brown, he is showing that he is continually getting consistent high-volume looks from Lamar Jackson. Again, he's had some drop issues. That's part of his fantasy portfolio at this point. That's a risk associated with Marquise Brown. But the playmaking ability is there. The field stretching capabilities are there. If the Ravens can keep this run game moving, maybe develop an underneath game more solid with Rashad Bateman in terms of their passing game, get Mark Andrews the football, they can hit some of these bigger passes over the top to Hollywood. He scores touchdowns too. He's a bigger red zone threat than you would anticipate for a player of his smaller stature and speedy play style. Marquise Brown is definitely a player who I had creeping outside of my top 24 for the rest of the season, but is definitely on his way back in because of his level of involvement in this offense and the playmaking abilities I see him having the rest of this season. Ceedee Lamb, another player who showed out this week, really impressed me, and I'm starting to feel more confident with him going forward now. It was never a question of Ceedee Lamb's involvement in this offense, a question of his talent or his capability of making plays, Dak Prescott's ability to give him the football. The main thing that had me backing off of Ceedee Lamb, even just slightly, 2 weeks ago, was the news about his ankle sprain at practice. And then after that, the very tough outing and performance that came against the Denver Broncos for this team as a whole. And the reason that was troubling to me is that for a wide receiver who's very explosive, relies on getting in and out of breaks very quickly and separating from defensive backs, if your ankle is sprained, that's going to impair your ability, at least somewhat, to get in and out of those breaks again, make sharp cuts, and to be at the top of your game. But it was a minor injury that he sustained, He got over that very quickly, and then moving forward, this past week, the numbers were fantastic. Only 2 grabs on 9 targets against Denver, but this past week, Ceedee Lamb hauled in 6 receptions, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This Dallas offense is set up perfectly for Ceedee Lamb to have monster fantasy performances. At this point, I don't think there should be any discussion or debate who is the number 1 wide receiver in a fantasy sense in this offense. It is clearly Ceedee Lamb over Amari Cooper. Amari, while there is still a boom or bust element to both of these players, it's much more extreme the way I see it for Amari Cooper. It seems to be all or nothing for him. I mean, he's a very talented player. He can certainly get the job done in his own right. But Ceedee Lamb's more dependable for me. I think Dak Prescott, who anticipated a big jump for Ceedee in the offseason, has made it a point of emphasis to get him the football. And when Dak is on his game, these two are virtually unstoppable. You talk about a team that's so balanced as well. Teams can't really hone in on stopping the Dallas Cowboy passing offense. That's something we've seen them struggle with in the years past even, is that when they're throwing the ball too much, obviously, that makes your tendencies more predictable. That makes things easier on the defenses. They can pin their ears back, rush the passer, make Dak throw in uncomfortable situations, and the corners are prepared to, start backpedaling and look for plays downfield. This season, far more balanced, a lot more thunder and lightning with Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. Zeke wasn't super efficient with his carries this past week, but he was still able to get the job done. The Cowboys, while not all of their passes were thrown by Dak Prescott this week because they were up so big, still ran the ball 37 times to just 34 passing attempts. 3 of those were not from Dak Prescott. I think that balance in the play-action game is going to help Ceedee Lamb a lot the rest of the season. Again, another player who I have big expectations for down the stretch. And then finally here, Devonta Smith. This was a player I had trending down up until 2 weeks ago. But what I've saw the last 2 weeks from Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith in terms of them formulating and developing chemistry is what makes me feel really confident about these two the rest of the year. Now, this isn't going to be a perfect situation where you get uber consistency from them going forward. I would expect Devonta Smith to still have 1 or 2 stinker games the rest of the year because I still don't view Jalen Hurts as a player who's going to get him the football on a consistent basis, just because he tends to be, not that any quarterback is a run-first threat, but I think Jalen still relies on his legs a little bit more than other quarterbacks do. Obviously, you see a Lamar Jackson-type player do this, but this year, he's really finally taken that step forward as a very dynamic passer. Now, we saw last week, that doesn't mean he can't struggle because the Dolphins did very, very well, as we touched on just a second ago in that game. But still, Devonta Smith isn't coming out here and seeing 10, 11, 12 targets a game. The last 2 weeks, he's produced very nicely, albeit on only 6 looks. This is still encouraging for me, though, because in the 6, which isn't a super high or super low marker, but in the 6 opportunities he did get, Devonta Smith is still out here making plays. And there's a couple of factors that have influenced the attention he's getting from Jalen Hurts, notably Dallas Goedert got knocked out of the game this past week. That's all fine. I understand that influences the ability or the amount of times he's getting the football and the ways he's being used in this offense. But the point here is that those plays still happened. That level of trust has been further extended from Jalen Hurts to Devonta Smith because they're making plays together. Devonta Smith went up and made a very impressive grab over his former teammate Patrick Surtain in the end zone for 6 and scored on another touchdown later in that contest. He's got 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, and touchdown dependency isn't something that we get super excited about here at SFS, rather the quite opposite. But the point is here, once again, Devonta Smith is making plays in the opportunities and in the looks he's given in these contests. So while he's not going to come out here and be a Cooper Kupp-esque volume monster, he is going to come out here and have some splash plays. He's going to come out, score touchdowns here and there when given opportunities in the red zone. And even if he's getting 6, 7, 8 targets a game, I expect him to be efficient with those opportunities. And again, make plays when given the opportunity. This guy didn't win the Heisman Trophy. Now, that's not something that always projects well into the National Football League, but he didn't win the Heisman Trophy sitting on the bench and kicking his heels. This is a talented football player, and I expect him to use that talent to do great things to our fantasy lineup the rest of the way. He'll give us some more wide receiver 2 weeks, some high-end wide receiver 2 finishes. Now this week, yeah, I got to check my stats and whatnot for the overall fantasy lineup of how things fell down, but he probably actually was a top 12 finisher with his two touchdowns. Wow, 12 points off those TDs, and then receiving yards and receptions, all that good stuff in PPR formats. But one more time here, Devonta Smith, someone whose arrow is trending upwards after 2 strong performances, and I think can start to be depended on a little bit more in these nicer matchups against teams as a wide receiver 2 or flex option the rest of the season. Alrighty, those were our 5 wide receivers I've got trending up for the rest of the 2021 fantasy football season. I think these players could be key contributors here. I like what I've seen from them as of late, and I hope they can continue to show their strong production levels for us the rest of the way this season. One more time, go check out thrivefantasy.com, deposit between $10 and $100, and use promo code SIZZLE. That'll again get you a 100% instant deposit match bonus and a free month of SFS Gold on our website, sizzlefantasy.com, which you can get by checking out the link in the description of today's episode. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.